was her report, but I didn't. Oh, it's I don't know. But then I can't see those. Is it zero?
You may be seated.
Say what's called Claire McKenna, Your Honor. Swear the testimony which you will now give to you before this court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Will you state and spell your name for the court reporter, please?
My name is Claire McKenna. First name spelled C-L-A-I-R-E. Last name M-C-K-E-N-N-A.
And how are you employed?
I'm employed with the Austin Police Department. I'm a DNA forensic scientist. I work in the Forensic Sciences Division in the DNA section.
And how long have you been in that capacity with the Austin Police Department?
I've been with the Austin Police Department since June of 2006.
And prior to your employment with the Austin Police Department, what educational background do you have?
I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from Texas A&M University, as well as some coursework towards a Master's of Science degree that I plan on completing in the future.
And in addition to that education, does your laboratory require consistent or constant updates of education and continuing education?
Yes, we are required to attend continuing education meetings each year and have continuing education credits.
And is the Austin Police Department's laboratory an accredited laboratory?
Yes, we are.
And specifically, I want to draw your attention to case number 2012-970-169. Are you familiar with that case number?
Yes.
And that's a number assigned by the Austin Police Department to this particular case that follows it throughout its course, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And in addition to that, this case is assigned a laboratory number?
Yes.
And what is the laboratory number in reference to this particular case?
The laboratory associated with that case number is L1203593.
And for the entire laboratory, any work that's done is supposed to be done under that laboratory number, is that correct?
Yes.
And reported appropriately.
Yes.
And what was your first involvement with this particular case?
The first involvement I had was to perform screening or the serology analysis and initially examine items that were submitted.
And what items were initially submitted to the laboratory?
So analysis was requested initially on laboratory item 40, a Jimenez pistol, as well as a magazine, a live round from the magazine, and a live round from the chamber. Item 95, which is described as the known saliva standard from Brandon Daniel. Laboratory items 60 are described as swabs from the left hand of Brandon Daniel. Item 61, swabs from the right hand of Brandon Daniel. Item 63, swabs from the face of Brandon Daniel. And item 116 is the known saliva standard from Jaime Padron. Or known blood standard, sorry.
And you said the first step was, what did you say it was, serology or screening?
Yes, so that's where I examine items of physical evidence. It could be weapons, clothing, sexual assault kits. The types of items vary just depending on the case and the circumstances. And that part of the examination involves visually examining the item, identifying biological stains such as blood or semen, or possibly swabbing areas. And by swabbing, I mean using a long Q-tip moistened with water. And you collect evidence from areas such as like from the handle of a weapon or the clothing to possibly determine who is handling or wearing the item. In terms of blood stains, I can use a presumptive test, which is a quick chemical test. And a positive test result is indicated by a color change, and that tells me that it's possibly blood. It's not a confirmatory test. So if a positive test result is reported, it's saying that it's possibly blood.
And as far as this particular case, what items did you swab for potential DNA evidence?
So swabbings were collected from item 40, the pistol, and item 40.1 is described as swabbings of stain A from the pistol. And I also collected item 40.2, swabbings of stain B from the pistol. Item 40.4 were swabbings from the grips of the pistol. 40.5, swabbings from the trigger, inside the trigger guard and release buttons of the pistol. Item 40.6, swabbing from the front and inside of the barrel of the pistol. And item 40.7, swabbing from the back ends of live rounds from the magazine and chamber.
And the reason those are labeled as 40 point something is all of those swabs came from what was submitted to you as item 40, and then you collected 7 swabs from that item. Is that correct?
Correct. We almost call them babies. So the 40.1 or 40.2 are essentially babies of the parent item, which is item 40.
Your Honor, may I have first witness? Okay, I'm showing you, in this case, what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 49.
And does that bag contain what the item that your laboratory labeled as item number 40?
Yes, I believe this entire item is item 40.
And it was originally packaged differently, and when it was opened, it was put in this larger bag? And that's why it has a separate chain of custody from what's inside it?
Yes, so I believe the original packaging was the brown paper bag on the inside.
And in fact, your initials appear on that chain of custody in the brown paper bag contained in the larger plastic bag.
Yes.
And did you perform the presumptive test you were speaking about on the items that you recovered from item number 40?
Yes, I did.
And what was the results of that presumptive testing?
So a presumptive test for the presence of blood was negative on the swabbings of the grips of the pistol, item 40.4, and the swabbings of the trigger, inside trigger guard, and the release buttons of the pistol, item 40.5. A presumptive test for the presence of blood was positive on the swabbings of stain A from the pistol, item 40.1, the swabbings of stain B from the pistol, item 40.2, the swabbing from the front and inside of the barrel of the pistol, item 40.6, the swabs from the left hand of Brandon Daniel, item 60.1, the swabs of the right hand of Brandon Daniel, item 61.1, and the swabs from the face of Brandon Daniel, item 63.1.
And following that presumptive testing, was there follow-up DNA testing?
Yes, I performed DNA analysis or testing on items 40.1, the swabbing of stain A from the pistol, item 40.4, the swabbing of the grips of the pistol, and item 61.1, the swab of the right hand of Brandon Daniel, as well as the known reference samples, items 95.1 and 116.1.
And why was all of the evidence that resulted in a presumptive positive test for blood not submitted for DNA testing?
We tend to test the most probative or aprobative stain from an item. So had I not gotten results from one of the first few stains that I tested, I could have proceeded on to test additional stains from the weapon.
And part of those decisions are made with consultation with other analysts as well as detectives and a research of the crime itself.
Yes, sometimes I can make the decision, or I can talk to my supervisor or a detective, and we can determine how many samples need to go on for DNA analysis.
And those decisions may weigh on things of how many people were injured in an incident and things such as that.
Yeah, we like to use the least amount of samples to answer the relevant questions. And if we don't get results for those samples, then we can continue on to process additional samples.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
And you referenced the known sample of Brandon Daniel. I forgot what number you referenced it as, but I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 56. Is that the same item that you referenced as the known sample of Brandon Daniel?
Yes, this is item 95, and it was collected as item 95.1.
That's your laboratory number is 95.1?
Yes.
And that was a sample collected by Anthony Nelson of Brandon Daniel?
I don't know exactly who collected it.
Well, I mean, on the chain of custody, does it reflect that it was collected by Anthony Nelson?
He's the first name in the chain of custody.
And showing you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 58. What lab number does that bear?
That's laboratory item 61.
And that is another item you submitted for DNA testing?
Yeah, I performed DNA testing on item 61.1, which is a swab from the right hand of Brandon Daniel.
And the first name on that chain of custody is Juanita Vasquez, is that correct?
Yes.
And then I'm showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 64. Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I recognize it as item 116.
And you reference that as the known blood sample of Jaime Padron?
Yes.
And specifically, that's a blood card from an autopsy, is that correct?
Yeah, the blood samples are collected on a FTA card from the medical examiner's office.
It's a routine part of an autopsy, and it's common to be submitted to you in this capacity.
Yes.
And what was the result of your DNA testing on the items that you tested?
So the DNA profile from the swabbing of stain A from the pistol, item 40.1, is consistent with a mixture. And a mixture means that I can tell from the profile that more than one individual is contributing to that DNA profile. Jaime Padron cannot be excluded as the contributor of the major component in the profile. And what major component means is that one individual's DNA profile is contributing much more than any other information in the profile and can be clearly distinguished from that other information. And I can treat it almost like a single source sample. The probability of selecting an unrelated person at random who could be the source of the major component in this DNA profile is approximately 1 in 78.74 quadrillion for Caucasians, 1 in 1.790 quintillion for blacks, and 1 in 15.43 quadrillion for Hispanics. So based on those probabilities, Jaime Padron is the source of the major component of that profile, excluding identical siblings. Brandon Daniel can be excluded as the contributor of the major component in the profile, and the minor component is below threshold. So the additional information that was observed in that DNA profile was below our detectable threshold.
And protocol for your laboratory would prohibit you from making any determinations as to the identity of whoever's DNA was below threshold. Is that correct?
Correct.
And those statistics that you referenced, the quadrillion, quintillion, how are those? Do you personally generate those, or how does that work?
We use a software program through the FBI. It's developed from the FBI, and it uses a population database that's widely used and generally accepted in the scientific community, and that is how we generate our statistics. I input the information into the program, and then we report out the calculations.
And just in general terms, there's a specified group of locations or loci that are tested in most accredited laboratories, share information, and then the statistics are derived from that shared information as to the frequency of occurrences of certain items. Is that fair?
Well, the statistics are based on allele frequency data based on the population database. So from the individuals that make up the population database, there's an adequate sample size to generate those allele frequencies. And that's what's used to sort of show how common or rare a profile might be in the general population.
And the areas in which you test are consistent with what other laboratories test, and all that information is shared.
We don't share the information, but all laboratories, we might look at certain regions the same, and there's certain core loci that most forensic DNA laboratories will perform analysis on.
And other than blood, what are other common sources of DNA?
Other common or good sources of DNA include, like you said, blood, semen, saliva, sweat. You can get DNA from epithelial or skin cells. But most of the good sources are blood, semen, saliva.
And when you perform DNA analysis, are you able to distinguish, other than the presumptive test you talked about, what is the source of the DNA you receive?
No, so even if I can confirm a sample as being a semen stain, or I can say they're tested positive for a presumptive test for blood, I can't say that the DNA profile came from the blood or the semen, just that I developed a DNA profile from this stain, and that stain also happened to test positive or negative for the substance in question.
And an individual's DNA is going to be consistent, whatever the source is that
Yes, the DNA is the same in all the cells that contain DNA in a person's body.
And as far as the DNA profile of the swabbing of the grips of the pistol, what was the result of your analysis on that?
The DNA profile from the swabbing of the grips of the pistol, item 40.4, is consistent with a mixture of at least 3 individuals. And again, I can clearly tell from the profile that there's definitely more than 2 people contributing to that profile. Jaime Padron cannot be excluded as a contributor to this profile. The probability of selecting an unrelated person at random who could be a contributor to this profile is approximately 1 in 3.982 million for Caucasians, 1 in 41.77 million for blacks, and 1 in 1.714 million for Hispanics. Brandon Daniel cannot be excluded as a contributor to this profile at certain regions, so not all of the regions that were examined, and statistics were performed at the regions where he was included, and at those locations the probability of selecting an unrelated person at random who could be a contributor to this profile is approximately 1 in 3,582 for Caucasians, 1 in 15,410 for blacks, and 1 in 3,784 for Hispanics. And the approximate world population is 6.8 billion.
And the reason the statistics are much lower as to Brandon Daniel as compared to Jaime Padron is because of the fact that Brandon Daniel's profile doesn't appear in all the locations that are tested.
Yeah, the information that's consistent with his DNA profile was not found at all of the locations or the regions that were examined.
And what did your analysis show on the profile from the swab of the right hand of Brandon Daniel?
The DNA profile from the right hand of Brandon Daniel is consistent with a mixture of Brandon Daniel and Jaime Padron. And what that means is that I did not observe any information in the DNA profile that was foreign to the information contained in those 2 individuals' DNA profiles. Jaime Padron cannot be excluded, Brandon Daniel cannot be excluded as a contributor to this profile. Jaime Padron cannot be excluded as the major contributor to this profile. And what that means is that his profile is the information consistent with his profile is contributing more to that mixture profile. The probability of selecting an unrelated person at random who could be a contributor to this profile is approximately 1 in 1.249 million for Caucasians, 1 in 10.27 million for blacks, and 1 in 828,500 for Hispanics.
I have no further questions.
No questions on the next, Your Honor.
Thank you. Please step down. You raise your right hand and face the clerk.
You do solemnly swear the testimony that you will give opinion before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir, I do.
You may proceed.
Sir, would you state your name and spell your name for the record, please?
Glenn Carl Harbison, spelled GLENN,
Mr. Harbison, how are you employed?
I'm employed by the Austin Police Department.
In what capacity?
I'm a chemist in the crime laboratory, chemistry laboratory.
Would you tell the jurors your educational and your professional background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Texas. I have previously been employed by the Texas Department of Public Safety in their laboratory system for approximately 8 years. And then I've been with the Austin Police Department in this capacity for a little over 25 years now.
And what does your job involve doing, your present job?
Right now, I will analyze blood samples that have been submitted by the police officers of the police department for alcohol content.
And how is it, first of all, how would you receive a blood sample that you're going to analyze?
We get the blood sample. We get all of our evidence from the evidence room. Evidence normally comes in through the evidence room. It's logged in, cataloged, labeled, and then we will get it from the evidence room.
And typically, how is that blood sample stored and packaged?
They normally come in what's called a vacutainer. It's a tube designed for blood. Most of the time they're plastic. They usually have a gray top.
And what is involved in taking that sample and doing a blood alcohol analysis?
Well, we will set up a series of known alcohol standards of different levels of concentration, and then we will run that along with our blood samples and then we'll compare those back to the standards to determine the alcohol content.
Now, for the jurors' education, is there some way of measuring how long alcohol would remain in a person's system?
Not that I have, no.
What are some of the factors that would determine
The length of time that alcohol will remain in the system? It'd be a wide variety of factors. The person's age, their weight, water content of their body at that time, contents of their stomach, what food they have in their stomach, what kind of food, what alcohol has been put in the body, over what length of time it was consumed, things like that. There are a number of factors. How their body actually eliminates alcohol. Be a number of factors.
And Mr. Harbison, I want to call you, when you receive a sample of blood for analysis, does it come with a unique lab number?
Yes, sir, it does.
And that unique lab number follows that sample wherever it goes to be tested by various people?
Yes, sir, it does.
I want to call your attention to unique lab number 1203593. Ask if you're familiar with that case.
What was the number again?
L1203593.
Yes, sir.
And what case, does your report show a suspect that case is associated with?
The name that I have is Brandon M. Daniel.
And does it show a date of birth for that suspect of November 11, 1987?
Yes, sir, it does.
Does it show an offense date for that of April 6 of 2012?
Yes, sir, it does.
And is that associated with Austin Police Department offense number 2012-09-70169?
Yes, sir.
Describe for the jurors what you did with that blood sample involved in this case.
The sample that I used, I actually analyzed it for alcohol content, and then subsequently sent that sample to a laboratory in Dallas, Southwestern Institute of Forensic Sciences, for drug analysis.
What was the result of your analysis for alcohol?
My analysis was there was no alcohol in the blood.
No alcohol in the blood sample of Brandon Daniels, is that correct?
That I had, yes, sir.
You're not pass, please.
Mr. Harbison, my name is Russ Hunt.
Yes, sir.
Is it my understanding correct that the body generally processes approximately 1 drink per hour out of the body?
That's a rule of thumb that a lot of people go by. It's actually been measured between .01 and .03 grams per deciliter per hour, which that averages out to about maybe one drink an hour.
And so you testified earlier that the passage of time makes a significant difference to what the tested blood level result is going to be.
Yes, sir. As soon as you consume alcohol, the body begins to absorb it into the bloodstream, and it also immediately begins to eliminate it.
Are there tests that are possible to determine whether there are other metabolites of alcohol in the bloodstream so that you can determine whether someone had recently imbibed alcohol?
There might be. I don't know of any.
The test you did just looked for alcohol itself?
Correct.
All right. Your Honor, we'll pass the witness.
All right. Jay?
No questions.
Thank you.
They didn't enter them, so I don't know. Yeah, did you?
No, sir.
Okay.
Next witness.
Statement called Aria McCollier.
All right.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony which you will now give opinion before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
You may proceed.
Will you state and spell your name, please?
Yes, my name is Aria McCall, ARIAMCCALL.
And how are you employed?
I am a forensic toxicologist at the Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas, Texas.
And what is the Institute of Forensic Sciences in Dallas?
We're the medical examiner's office for Dallas County. We perform the autopsies for deaths that are in that county. We also do suspected DWI cases and sexual assault cases as well. We're the forensic laboratory for that area.
And does your laboratory have the capability of screening a blood sample for the presence of substances such as Xanax or Ambien or things of that nature?
Yes, we do. The toxicology department does screen regularly for drugs and alcohol.
And specifically, were you the primary analyst on evidence submitted from the Austin Police Department under their agency case number 2012097169?
Yes, I was.
And that case was labeled to you as the case involving Brandon Daniel, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what testing was done on that sample provided by the Austin Police Department?
For this particular case, we were requested to screen for drugs, and let me just check. A THC in general screen, and in parentheses, alprazolam.
And would the testing that was done on the blood submitted also show the presence of Ambien if it was present?
Yes, we do see Ambien, which chemical name is zolpidem. We would have seen that.
And you stated that you're, in parentheses, it said alprazolam. What did you say? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. The name of the drug is alprazolam. It's commonly marketed under the name Xanax.
And what class of drugs is that?
Alprazolam, otherwise known as Xanax, is classified as a CNS depressant. It is a benzodiazepine.
And was the presence of that located in the blood sample submitted to your laboratory?
Yes, we did quantitate for alprazolam.
And in what quantification did you receive?
We quantitated alprazolam at a 0.16 milligrams per liter.
And you stated that you also performed a test for THC?
That is part of our general screening testing, yes.
And was it done in this case?
Yes, it was.
And what was the result of that?
The screen for THC, which is also known as marijuana, was positive, so it went on to a quantitation for marijuana, and the result of that test is 40 nanograms per milliliter of carboxytetrahydrocannabinol, which is the inactive metabolite of marijuana.
Can you explain to us what an inactive metabolite means?
Sure. The active metabolite of marijuana or cannabis is tetrahydrocannabinol. That is the primary psychoactive component of marijuana typically smoked. That is, again, psychoactive, so that is what is having the effect on the person. Carboxytetrahydrocannabinol is a metabolite. That is what the body has done to break down the tetrahydrocannabinol in order for it to eliminate it.
And so, regardless of the amount, the carbotetra, what you found in this blood sample, sorry, would not have any psychoactive effect.
Carboxytetrahydrocannabinol does not have a psychoactive component. THC is rapidly distributed out of the bloodstream for testing, but that's correct. Carboxytetrahydrocannabinol does not have a psychoactive component.
And would the quantity of that or the presence of that indicate to you definitively when marijuana was smoked?
Not definitively. I would only be able to give a pretty broad range, essentially a guess.
And if you were to give a broad range, what would that be?
I would say possibly sometime within the last 24 hours is a possibility.
From the date the blood, or the time the blood was drawn?
That's correct.
And what about the quantification or the presence of alprazolam?
Well, the presence of alprazolam, I would say, I wouldn't be able to say exactly when it was taken. That is dependent upon the dose that was taken. However, generally speaking, between the time that a blood sample is drawn, between the time of an event is typically a few hours. Generally speaking, the amount of alprazolam or the concentration of most drugs is generally going to be pretty much the same.
And what other tests were performed on the blood in this particular case?
Well, the tests that we performed were for a general screen. So we tested for a classification of drugs that is called acid neutrals. We tested for alkaline drugs, which is alprazolam and zolpidem, as we've mentioned before. We tested for the class of drugs called opiates, which would include things like morphine and hydrocodone and oxycodone. And we also screened for the presence of the metabolite of cocaine.
And the only items that were present in this particular blood sample that was submitted are the two things you've already testified to?
Of the drugs that we test for, these are the only two drugs that we found.
So the opiates and the cocaine metabolites were all negative?
That's correct.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Call, my name is Russ Hunt. I didn't hear you say that y'all tested for methamphetamine, just cocaine.
As part of our general screen, under the alkaline quantitation, we do see and would quantitate for methamphetamine.
Okay. And that obviously was not found in this blood sample, is that correct?
I do not have any results reported for the for methamphetamine, so unless I look very closely at my chemical test, it would have been reported as negative.
And similarly, MDMA or ecstasy, that would show up on this test as well?
That's correct. We do see MDMA, and it was not seen in this case.
Ms. McCall, I'm showing you a document that we marked as Defense Exhibit 11. You recognize this document, don't you?
Yes, I do.
It's a copy of a document that you brought with you. Is that correct? Just a little smaller.
Yes, this is a copy of my original case report that I keep in the official case file.
Okay, and this is a lab report or case report that you prepared on May 11th, 2012. Is that correct?
The finalized report was created on May 11th, 2012, yes.
Okay, great. Your Honor, we would move for admission of Defense Exhibit 11.
No objection, Your Honor.
And that, again, is just a lab report that reiterates exactly what you testified to earlier.
That's correct. There's some additional information at the top, but the tested results are what I've just mentioned.
Okay, and that specifically indicates that The benzodiazepine, specifically alprazolam, is 0.16 milligrams per liter.
That's correct.
And the THC metabolites there, 40 nanograms per milliliter.
Right, the carboxy THC at 40 nanograms per ml.
Fair enough.
Now you did you do the quantitative analysis yourself, or did you just compile those results and put them in the report form?
I did the majority of the drug testing, that is for the acid neutral and the alkaline quantitation. I did do a preliminary quantitation of the benzodiazepine alprazolam. However, it goes to an additional test for quantitation. I did not perform that test.
As part of your training, do they train you on how long it takes bodies to metabolize these various substances, or basically are you just doing the testing and that would be somebody else's purview?
I do have training in some human performance as it concerns drugs.
So specifically with respect to alprazolam, have you received training as far as that goes?
Yes, I typically testify in the aspect of driving while intoxicated cases, so I am aware and have been trained in some of the matters of alprazolam.
Is there a specific, with alcohol, we have a 0.08 is the cutoff for legal intoxication. Is there any specific number that's similar to that with alprazolam intoxication?
No, there is not. There is no equivalency of quantitation that you could assign for a drug, especially in the state of Texas, that is representative of a 0.08, as we're typically aware of in alcohol.
So you couldn't look at that 0.16 number and say this person's definitively intoxicated or not definitively intoxicated?
Not definitively, no. A person's history with the drug, their prescription, how long they've been taking it, for what purposes, all play a role in the interpretation of drugs.
How does the 0.16 milligrams per liter compare with other tests that you've done? Is that a very high level or a low level, or can you recall?
In the cases that I've tested with the presence of alprazolam, this would be a